think today what we're going to do, I hope you hear some things maybe you've never heard before. And I think what we're going to try to do is start out in the north end of town and work our way down the street to the railroad tracks and to the river. So we'll start out with the Loki's Garage, and that's probably one most people's never heard of. And that was located, can you hear me okay? That was located out where Simmers' garage was at. And they had a big fire there in 1925. And then and some of these things we're just going to mention and not talk about, and others we'll go into detail a little bit because it's quite a few of them. But that Simmers' garage started, I think, in 1934. And then we come down this direction. They had George Bull. He was a builder. He built a lot of the houses back around 1900. And I've got a paper, I know he was in operation in 1914. And a lot of these dates, they'll be in a big span of time, but we don't have exactly the starting and the ending date. But we know when they was working at their job. And George Bull, he dealt in doors, sashes, blinds, moldings, screen doors, and he had a planing mill. And like I say, he built a whole lot of the houses around. Now next we'll go to the New Method Dry Cleaners, then up below Simmers' garage. And that started in 1947. Don Chris owned that. Now, it was another Mitchell and Shank that we came across here maybe a couple of years ago, but we don't know much about them, but I think they were located in, I think you might say in behind Simmers' garage. And the only thing I see on the advertisement, they dealt in pure poultry feed. That's about all I know about them. So we have one of their yardsticks out here. And then we go to Gordon's garage. What year did Gordon's garage start? 1932?
Beats me.
Okay, well that's what I always heard.
Yeah, but that would have been 2 years before I was born.
I thought
Two
maybe
years
I
after
thought maybe you heard somebody talking. And of course they sold Studebakers. And then I think 1962 or early 60s it became Mason Motor Sales. And next, coming back this way, we had the Sinclair station right beside of Gordon's garage. And Charlie Bell ran that, and probably in the 1940s, but I know that was in operation through the 1950s, because I used to stop in there and play the pinball machine. Then we come to the Columbia Theater. That was right beside the Sinclair station, and the place where it said it was a narrow, long building. And we don't know when it started or for sure when it ended, but my guess would be around 1917 or 18 is when it started. And I think it closed down in 1930. The screen was 8 feet by 10 feet, and they didn't have chairs, they had benches, and they were at an angle. And Ruth Lale played the piano, and that was one of Dr. Vaughan's daughters. And then, well, before that though, I had my cousin Virgil. They let him in the movie at 10 years old to crank the Victrola for their old silent movies. And so if he was 10 years old, that would make it 1925. So he got in free for that. And then Ruth Lale played piano, and then later on they got a player piano, so she lost her job. Of course, I don't know whether she even got paid for it or not anyway. And back in those days, the film had a habit of breaking all the time. And so when they didn't get it spliced back together and get the movie going again in time, people would start stomping their feet and yelling and hollering and clapping their hands until they got the movie going again. And one of the old ladies years ago told me you could take a empty bread wrapper to the theater and that would get you into the movie. What, y'all gonna have to help here. What would they have used old bread wrappers for, empty bread wrappers in the 1920s? I've never heard why. But she said she'd done. What? But anyway, the theater, they had another older fella years ago, and he said he saw the last movie showing in the theater. Now I can't verify this, but he said it was about the dog Rin Tin Tin. And so whether that's true or not, I really can't say. But I think the reason the theater shut down, just a couple of years later, about 1932, I think, the talking movie started, and I think they didn't have the money or didn't want to put the money in. They'd had to renovate the whole theater probably to do the talking movies. So I think that's why it closed down. Now here's another thing across the street from the theater. A place that probably most people had never heard of is Frank Reed's Barbershop. You remember that, don't you? And he was operating through the 1940s, I know, because when I was 5 and 6 and 7 years old, that's where we'd go get our hair cut for a quarter. Yeah. And you too? Oh, good, yeah, you can relate to that. Now we had to come on this direction. Most people know it now as the old Minnick store building, but it was the Bowman Dingledine drugstore. And then after a few years, Mr. Dingledine bought out Mr. Bowman, and that drugstore operated from 1883 until 1907. And after Mr. Dingledine ran it for a while, he wanted to retire in 1907. But now we'll kind of jump down this way and we call it fits together. Dr. Vaughan started his medical practice down here at the old drugstore on the corner. In 1884, he started his drugstore in 1895. So from 1895 to 1907, when Mr. Dingledine retired, Timberville had 2 drugstores. And I always thought that was really unusual because probably most little towns back then didn't have a drugstore at all. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, in the same building, B. Frank Minnick started Minnick Store in 1930. And of course, years later, his sons became involved and all. And you have to give me a minute to think every now and then. Years ago, when the town had one of their heritage days, or Founders Day or whatever, they put a plaque down there in front of the, mounted it in the sidewalk right in front of their store. And they had J.B. Minnick down there. We got him a chair, and a big crowd of people gathered up. And so just kind of honoring him, you know. And so in 1986, when Minnick store closed, I went in and I bought a couple of pounds of cheese. And so I went home and got a little piece of cheese and put it in a plastic bag and presented it to him. And you know, I still got that cheese at home, and now it's almost 40 years old, from 1986. And I even, when I had it out, I even tasted it, and it didn't kill me. it was pretty well dried out, I would say. But he was kind of glad he did that, and he told me that he'd saved some of the cheese when they closed down, and he had it in the refrigerator, and about a year later he checked it and it was full of worms. So he had to throw his away, but I had mine in the freezer. So Minnick's operated there from 1930 until 1954, when they moved across the river to where everybody knows the Permastone building, where Minnick store was at, and then like I say, he closed down in 1986. Now, we'll, it's just a lot of these things, it's just too many details to get into, really. It just takes up. Now, we're moving up here to the building right next door, Dr. Welty Forney. He was a dentist, and he attended the University of Maryland. And in 1898, he started his dental practice here in Timberville. And by 1909, he had over 1,000 patients, because there probably wasn't many dentists around back then. Of course, he's the one that took most of those old pictures we have here in the museum now. We got to credit that to him, because he's the one who took most of those old pictures from about 1899 to about 1903. And if we didn't have those, it'd be a great thing that we were missing, really. Then we go across the street to Richard Miller. And I call it the Rudy Miller house that they tore down years ago. And Rich Miller had a store in there, and 2 big plate glass windows in the front of the house, and the store was on the left-hand side as you go in. And I don't know when he started it, probably the 1940s. And do you know? Okay.
And I know he had gas pumps out there.
Yeah, he had the gas pump, yeah, the people used to come through Timberville, the people that bought up things like that, and they would stop there and try to buy that gas pump, and he wouldn't sell it. But finally, I think after so many years, he did, and I think he got a pretty big price out of it, I think.
And he kept his orchard boxes there as well.
Yeah, yeah, yep. So then, the William Thompson house, the big brick house is set right beside the museum. Now, William Thompson is the one that gave the land for the churches and the school below the cemetery there, and the land for the cemetery itself. And a couple of businesses in there over the years. The house was built in 1837, but you remember Pooch Caulfield had a restaurant in there, and Hugh and Nala Good had a restaurant in there, I think, for a couple of years. But that's kind of what went in that house where William Thompson built. And it says one of the finest brick homes in all of Rockingham County when that thing was built. Oh, and going back to the Rudy Miller house, that one was built in 1837. 39. William Thompson house was 37. I'm getting all mixed up. Now we come to the Rockingham Mill building. That's here, and it was built in 1941. And in January 1942, it was some company from Roanoke that came up and held 2 cooking classes in here. And then a month later, on February 9th, 1942, the Rockingham Mill opened here in this building. Now, we go to the post office. I don't even know where to begin. William Thompson was the first postmaster in Timberville in 1835. And then Mr. Litchlighter was postmaster around 1860, and he was the grandfather of Dr. Vaughn. And then William Pence, we'll talk about his story in a little bit. He was postmaster in the 1890s. And well, now's a good time to talk about it. I have 2 little documents, post office box rent receipts, one for 1894 and one of 1895. I guess they were my grandfather's, I guess. And the post office box rent, now the last time I paid mine, it was about $60-some, I think. And those 2 years, it was a nickel for 3 months, so 20 cents a year. Well, that's what that inflation will do for you. Then I was reading some of Dr. Welty Forney's diaries here just several days ago. They moved the post office, no doubt, from William Pence's store over to Dr. Vaughn's drugstore. I think back in those days it was pretty common for the post office, the people going to the post office to be in the back of somebody's store. I think that was a common thing. I think back then. And Charlie Forney built the post office building that's still here. He built that in 1912, and he was postmaster. And then I guess the first woman postmistress in Timberville in 1922 was Ethel Vaughn Hoover. That was another daughter of Dr. Vaughn, and she was postmistress for I don't know how many years. But then the post office moved from here in the old part of town over across the river into the left-hand side of the new bank building. And if most of you remember, you going in the bank, you go in the right-hand door for the bank, and the left-hand side would be for the post office. And then they left that building. No doubt the bank probably needed more room, so the post office moved from the bank building down to where the post office is now in 1974. I think that's about enough for the post office. Now, on the top floor of the post office building was a switchboard. And I have a couple of notes here on that because I can't remember all this stuff. Oh, here it is. On the switchboard, and well, for example, in the first 9 months of 1948, there were 10,797 phone calls placed, and 1,485 of those were long distance calls. Now, they were, in 1940, the rates for telephone was $6 a year, and they were getting ready to raise the rates. And I have all this stuff written down at home, but I think if you had one telephone, I don't know what the rate was going up to, but if you had two phones, you got charged so much more. If you had three phones, well, it was, I think, maybe $30-some a year then, after they raised the rates or what, you know. Now, in 1917, the Harrisonburg Mutual Telephone Company had bought out all the telephone exchanges in Rockingham County. Of course, they kept operating, of course, but I guess the telephone system actually owned them in 1917. Okay. Dr. Vaughn's medical practice, well, I've almost said everything about that, he started his medical practice here in 1884, and he opened his drugstore in 1895. And then that drugstore also moved over across the river in 1954. And the medical store and the drugstore moved over beside each other across the river, I think within 2 weeks of each other. If it is somewhere around the 1st of December in 1954. So everything was started migrating across the river. And now the D.S. Walter store, that's down here on the corner where you remember the brick building that was torn down about a year or so ago, here right at the corner of Main Street and Church Street. And it got a big hole in the side of the building, and they was afraid it was going to be a disaster if that whole building would collapse, so they finally had to tear it down. But the D.S. Walter started that location in 1893. It was a wooden building, and we have pictures of it here in the museum. And then he must have decided he needed a new store building, so in 1909 he built that brick building, and the bricks and all were made in the field behind the store. And so D.S. Walter operated till 1935, and then it was sold. Of course, D.S. Walter died in the meantime, I think, because he didn't live to be very old. I think maybe 50 couple. And then the Timberville then it became the Timberville Department Store, and that operated until 1948, and they moved across the river. Then in 1949, the Newman's Building and Material Corporation started that building, and then in 1954 they built a new building up on the bluff, which is now Branner Printing. So they moved from here in the old part of town in 1954 up to that building. They had the headquarters up there for quite a few years. And let's see. Now we'll go across the street. You know where the bookkeeping place is? It was an old filling station. All right, now that W.A. Kent store, but it was built in 1844 by Nason Bear. And then in 1860, W.A. Pence, William Pence was his name, W.A. Pence started his store, and it operated for years. And then we already talked about the post office is in the back of his store. Because I've got those things that he had to sign his name to the bottom because he was postmaster. And then that building was torn down. Oh, on the lower part of that building, it was a little lower roof and all of that building. And W.C. Hoover, he was a church, the brethren preacher up at our church here. And he was a great big man, but he was one of the Hoovers from down along the New Market Road, and he raised his own cattle and all. And in 1899, he started a butcher shop in there, and just things like that maybe you've never heard of before. But now that building was torn down in 1930, and the Gulf Filling Station was built in 1932, and that operated. You can still see the thing around where the gas pumps would have been and all. You know, it's but then some of the different businesses in there over the years was, if you remember, Fred Bowman had his electrical business in there for a number of years. Then there was a small engine repair, And now, the bookkeeping place, and I think she told me about 5 years ago that she'd already been there about 25 years, and so she's been in there about 30 years already. So, that was kind of the different businesses in and out of that, building. Now we go to the Farmers and Merchants Bank building, and at the location of the old Farmers and Merchants Bank building down here on Main Street, Abraham Williamson started his first store in Timberville in 1814. And then in 1833, William D. Thompson bought Abraham Williams out, and when the Williamson ran the store, the town was known as Williamsport. When Thompson bought him out, then Timberville was known as Thompson's Store. And then, this don't have anything to do with the business, but in 1850, this place was known as Riddle's Tavern. But,
Did you ever find out where Riddle's Tavern was?
yes. I
Tell
think AC and I kind of figured it out. At the location where Old Kip's store was at, where the limestone rubble's at now. Have you ever heard that?
No.
Okay, but I think that's where Riddle's Tavern was at. That took years and years to try to figure that out, and I still can't guarantee it, but I think that's right. But, now after William Thompson had the store in that old building, that building was torn down in 1907, and so it would have been about 90 years old, and if you see some of the pictures that had all kinds of signs plastered on and everything, it looked like it was 90 years old. So somebody must have been planning to start a bank. So they tore that building down and made room for the bank. And Mr. John Hoover that you mentioned earlier, he's the fellow that started the bank here in Timberville, and he was the first president, and he was president for 30 years. And then I'm not sure who took over him. I think it was Bob Byers. But Byers and Hoover was a business in town, and you facing the bank from the main street. The Byers and Hoover actually started in 1904, and their old building tore down. Now, I guess when they tore the building down, they had to make room for them someplace, so they had the left-hand side of the bank building as the door you go in for them, and to go into the bank building, you go in the right-hand door that's facing Main Street, of course. And then, well, I think it was Driver and Hegerman, after Byers and Hoover shut down, Driver and Hegerman was operating, I think in there also through the 1920s to through the 1930s. So they were the successors to Byers and Hoover. And it's a lot of businesses here in Timberville over the years. Now, on the top floor of the bank building was the Hotel Rockingham. And they had 5 large rooms and 5 small rooms. Small rooms are $1.50 a night. The large rooms are $2 a night. And I think J.A. Garber, he was first operator of the Hotel Rockingham, and he was also the first cashier of the Farmers and Merchants Bank. And one time in the 1940s, one of my cousins, most of you knew her, she found some fella dead up there in one of the rooms. He just died. I don't think there was any foul play or anything. I remember she telling me that. Okay, we already talked about the Byers and Hoover, and some of the things. A lot of those stores back then, it seemed like they all sold about the same thing: agricultural implements, fertilizer, cement, hardware, coal, corn, oats, hay, and so forth. And one thing that I never did see on any of their advertisements, I got the records when they were building the Lutheran parsonage out on North Main Street in 1919, 1920, and 21. They got ready to put in the septic system, and so they must have hit rocks. So they went down to Byers and Hoover and bought dynamite. And I've never seen that advertised. Yeah, okay, Driver Hegerman, they were in the 1920s and 30s, and yeah, we went through that already. Now we're going to talk about the location where the old Farm Bureau building is. The brick building sets up along the railroad tracks, if you all know where I mean. And in 1908, it was a poultry processing plant there. And then the Farmers Exchange had their business at that location. And I know that they were operating in 1920. I got papers with the 20, but I don't know when they started. But then in 1924, the Farm Bureau bought out the Farmers Exchange, so that's when the Farm Bureau moved to Timberville. They've been here 101 years. And so they built it was a nice wooden building that they bought, the Farmers Exchange had, but in 1938 they tore that down and they built the brick building that's still there now. And 1953 they moved up to our recreation center, close to the poultry plant. And then they stayed there. I think it was Spidey told me about 1973, and the Farm Bureau then has been still over where they're at now, but they moved over in '73. But they stayed down in this brick building for 15 years. And let's see. I think that covers all that. Now, here comes the good part. Timberville had this distillery, and a lot of people think it started in 1934, but that's not right. It started in 1928, because I've even seen a picture, it was dated 1928, but a lot of people, they almost went bankrupt in 1934. And so some fellow from New York came down and poured a whole lot of money into it, and so I think that's why a lot of people think it started in 34, but it was really 28. And they built 17 big wooden vats. And now this distillery, if you get down there next to the railroad track and you walk up the railroad track and about a half mile and be over through the field up on that knoll, or if you want to go around the other way, you go up to Simmers' apartments. It's kind of set in behind Simmers' apartments. But that's where the distillery was at. And they built 17 big wooden vats, and each of them held 5,000 gallons. And it took a month to run off a batch. But it was I think they had an official name, the Shenandoah Valley Distilling Company or something, but I always call it the distillery. And we have a couple of bottles out here with labels on. If you ever find a bottle like that and get it for a good price, the last one I saw sold was years ago, and it brought $350. But we got the ones out here, they got pretty nice labels on them and everything. And it was Blossom Queen Apple Brandy is what they brewed. And they said when they were operating here, the people, the older folks told me that when they were in business, the federal officials were around here all over the place. I guess to make sure they wasn't selling something on the side. And but they closed down in about 1949. And I talked to one guy who said that he was there and he helped dismantle the copper tubing and stuff when they were taking the place apart. So from 1928 to 1949. Now we'll get into the railroad. What? Yes.
Before you get into that, in the country store, we have a bottle of Macaulay liquor.
Oh, you do?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, if anybody's got anything to say,
His brother had a distillery.
we want to hear it, so if anybody has anything to say, and if anybody's not following where we're at, just say so, and we'll try to get you at the right spot. Most of you doing good.
We all know where the railroad is. We all know where the railroad tracks are.
Yeah. Well, I had one lady one time, we did a thing like this years ago, and she lived in Timberville for decades, and after it was over, she came up to me and said, she didn't even know where the old bank building was at. And she almost lived within sight of it, and so she was completely lost. So if anybody don't know exactly what spot we're talking about, just pipe up and we'll see if we can get you situated.
Where was the post office, the first post office on this side of the river?
Well, the first post office building is the one that's still there now. The post office before that was in the back of the old store building.
The back of the store behind the bookkeeping office, the border store.
That was the first, okay.
Don't forget the stockyards and the other stuff across the street.